Well, hello, Joe.
Hello.
Welcome to our show, the Goldmine Podcast.
Thank you.
So this is Joe Uhan, and you are a physical therapist, and you're not unfamiliar to the area, but you're new to being here more permanently. Is that correct? Yep. Origins in Oregon. Yeah. And I also understand that you are a ultra runner.
Correct.
That's really interesting to me. So without further ado, why don't you just kind of give us your story on basically how you became a physical therapist, and I don't know, we'll just start off there.
I feel like when I tell this story, it's concentric circles towards medicine, I guess, or towards where I am today as a physical therapist. When I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor because I thought it was cool and they made a lot of money.
Right.
Got into college and kind of chickened out in that. Just didn't think I had what it took and didn't want to deal with blood and surgeries, or I don't know. I wasn't sure, but I just kind of backed away from that. But I was doing all the hard science. So I wound up with a degree in chemistry. I loved that science. I loved kind of putting things together. And that was my first clue about, my interest in orthopedics.
Right.
And, the human body and putting things together. I just didn't want the blood in the guts necessarily, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'd stepped away from that. I came out of college and with a degree in chemistry, I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. Wound up back home. I did grow up in the Midwest in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and decided to try coaching. I was on a run with my old high school coach, asked him if I could help out, and within a week of doing that, I just fell in love with it. And so I'm like, I want to do something in this realm. So either teaching or coaching. Teaching was a little bit convoluted as well. So I'm like, I'm going to be a coach. So I went back to college, did a master's program in exercise science. Midway through that, however, I was increasingly dealing with my own injuries, dealing with my high school kids' injuries, and trying to help them. And it was like in the very early days of Dr. Google, he knew.
Right.
Dr. Google was only in med school back then in the early 2000s, so there wasn't much out there. And so I finally went and I saw my own physical therapist, and I had this sort of breakthrough moment. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. Like he relieved my pain. I'm like, this is amazing. I should go learn this for real. And so I did, and that's kind of where I am today.
Right.
And so I bring to physical therapy to my practice. I always tell people I wear three hats. I'm the medical professional, but I'm also an athlete, and I still am an athlete, and I'm a coach. So I bring that unique sort of trifecta.
Right. That makes sense now, of course. Your business name is Uhan Performance, and so when you kind of show me that kind of like trinity of things, it really paints a picture of like performance. It kind of gives even a deeper meaning to performance, right? It's not just functionality, but it's like comfortable functionality.
Yeah, and I think that performance, there's a athletic or a competitive connotation to that, but it really is. I mean, it is functional.
Yeah.
And it's like a grace almost to being able to function with ease and function joyfully.
Yeah.
And so I take that into, I took that athletic component into my practice with everyone.
Right.
I mean, my favorite client isn't necessarily a runner, isn't necessarily an athlete. It is an active person who values using their body.
Right.
And they tend to be people this day and age at this level of my career. They're complicated. They've had a medical history. They've had falls. They've had other challenges, but they still are so highly motivated to use their body in a joyful, interactive way. And that kind of lifelong function, lifelong performance.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And so then I was about to kind of acknowledge the meaning that I'm assuming you find in that, because, for example, people still want to enjoy life even as they age, and their body quote unquote, starts getting more complicated. Let's say it that way, without getting too negative.
Exactly.
And I can't imagine the fulfillment that you might get, the joy that you feel when you see the joy on somebody's face when they're like, oh my gosh, like my knee doesn't do that thing anymore, or maybe it's the relief of pain or the overall comfort of something in their body that they haven't felt in a long time. That seems, if you're living with an ailment and then all you needed was somebody to know how to fix it for you and they do that, it's like, where have you been?
Yeah, that's a great feeling. And I think it goes beyond that still to two things, in what sport or what athletics or what running has done for me. And for me as a kind of a young adult to have found running, the first thing that it did was empower me. So empowerment is such an important outcome from physical activity. To say, hey, I used to be able to only do this much stuff, and now I can be here.
Right.
And whether that's from one push-up to 10 or 100 or to run a mile or to run 100 miles, that's the empowerment. And that's sort of this personal thing, right? Well, then beyond that is inclusion. Because if your physical being and your physical activity allows you to become a part of a group that does X, Y, Z, that's community.
Yeah.
Right.
And so empowerment and inclusion is just such a big part of my practice today. And I think that's the bigger thing. Yeah, there's pathology, like my knee doesn't work. But what really affects people so profoundly in a negative way and then in a positive way is what that does to their lives.
And what it enables them to participate in.
Is their pain disempowering because they can't do what they used to do that gave
them joy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then are they now excluded from their community or from their favorite thing or their favorite people because of that?
Yeah, because if their community was people doing an active, activity, that's going to hurt emotionally.
Yep.
Pretty
so
bad.
It's running, it's hiking. And in this community, it's definitely, it's hiking, getting into the canyon or yoga practice or martial arts or cycling. Those are people's lives.
Yeah.
Or it can just be being a parent.
Right.
Playing with your kids, holding your kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and I can also imagine too, even like a solo, running is a meditation. And you could make that argument, right? So let's say a person had kind of relied on running as a self. It's not just like the physical, my body is healthy thing. That's obviously wonderful, and you feel better when your body feels better, of course. But if you're dealing with your mental health by running, and then you can no longer run. That has way larger implications.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's pretty great. So you fell in love with running after college, it sounds like, or like.
It was during high school. So
okay.
I ran the tail end of high school, and I ran most of my college career, a little D3 school back.
When did you get crazy with it?
You mean like running ultras?
Yeah. I'm gonna speak for everybody and call it crazy.
That's fair.
Yeah.
You could have called it earlier, just marathons.
Yeah,
but,
true.
2010 was my first, and then I came down here and ran Western States for the first time in 2011, and ran it 2 more times in 12 and 13. And so that was that taught me a lot about sort of the human potential.
Yeah.
And then other aspects of stress and how the body adapts and maladapts over time. But it also really connected me to this community.
Right.
Because this is, the home of the finish line of Western States, about a mile away from here. And so I really immersed in the Western States community, really spent a ton of time down here, met a lot of people, forged a lot of relationships, and that's why I'm here today.
Yeah. It is very...
it's building that community. It's,
Yeah, back to what you said earlier, for sure. There's 2 things I wanted to ask about. One, was, what the hell is it like to run 100 miles? And the second thought was, you used a word called maladapt, and I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to learn more about that. So like it really, I'm having a hard time actually imagining what it's like to run 100 miles. My brain can't imagine it other than it's a mental fortitude challenge of pain mitigation, of like how much pain how long can you take the pain? That's all I can think about.
I'm going to turn that on you.
Okay.
Because you have kids, right?
Yes. 4.
Okay, imagine this child is born, and maybe whether it's your first or your fourth.
Sure.
And you're just like, okay, I don't even know what the math is here, but let's say, boy, what is it going to be? Is it 6,000 or 60,000? What's 18 years times 365 days?
30, yeah.
That's about
So-
16,000, 18,000 days, right? Imagine just like, okay, here you go. You gotta figure this out for 18,000 days.
Yeah.
If you stare at that number, you're like, I can't do that.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so instead, what do? You just take it a day at a time.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, you kind of look at that kid over there. You're like, oh my gosh, like where did the time go?
Mm-hmm.
They were in diapers, and now they're off to kindergarten. And that's sort of the approach you have to take with a 100-miler.
Okay.
Like you can't look at it as, okay, I'm over at
School.
Lake Tahoe,
Yeah.
at Lake Tahoe, and I got to get here.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're like, oh my gosh, that's 100.2 miles. No, it's like, no, you get to the top of the ski hill first.
Yep.
Right.
And then you're top of the ski hill, and then you get down to where the wilderness ends, and then
Okay.
and so on. And you eat that elephant one bite at a time.
Okay.
And so I think from a mental standpoint, that's how it's done, and that's way more important than the physical. I think.
Even though I think it's amazing physically that somebody could sustain that as well. I mean, both factors to me are kind of mind bend. I mean, it's great. Because there's people that do 400s, right? Or 300?
I mean,
Not
the
that
sky's the limit in terms of
okay,
crazy.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Beyond 100.
Well, as we've seen, because at one point in time, they didn't. Those races did not exist. Yeah, and because they were thought. I mean, like nobody was thinking like that. Like, oh, someday we're going to be able to run hundreds of miles at a time.
But there's crazy events where I can't remember what it's called, but there's some event in New York City where you run around one city block
Mm-hmm.
for as long as it takes to do like 3,000 miles or something. It's
Really?
yes.
Wow.
I can't remember what it's called. But there's these, and it's not continuous running. It's like people will be camped out there, or
Mhm.
they'll come and they'll go. So there's been crazy for a long time.
Got
I
it.
think we're with the advent of social media and other
Awareness.
things,
Yeah.
we're seeing it more, and I think human potential is getting nudged to it's becoming more widespread,
Okay.
Right.
which is good. I think again, anything that can expand horizons and
Yeah.
empower people to a certain degree can be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I do appreciate your explanation being the one segment at a time, right? As goes life, right? Which is actually the exact analogy you made with the growing child, right?
Yep.
I used to, when I was a kid, I ran cross country and whatnot, and you speaking about that like one segment at a time, it did remind me of that, because it was just like when you're just racing, and, you're a kid, you're racing a mile at a time when you're doing cross country, right? And it was just like, it was more of a speed thing, not so much as an endurance thing, because it's like a mile's only so long, right? I mean, you're going to run the thing, with hills and stuff, you're running it in like 7 minutes or something like that. And it was, I remember the mental challenge. There was always the thought of like, this is difficult. Do I keep going? And then once you got through that wall, it was like, well, if I'm going to keep going, what now? And then it was like, well, go get the person in front of you. And then once you got picked off that person, then it was like, go pick off that person. And then the beauty of like having coaches around is they're like, oh, go get that guy. And you're like, no, I decided I was only going to get this guy. And you're telling me to go get that one. Right. And the level of achievement, that you're able to attain with that kind of support and the self-support and the support of your coaches and peers. I guess you could just scale that out to 100 miles.
Yeah.
And I think
one hill at a time.
That to me is the meaning of life. And I've actually literally thought about the meaning of life and come up with my own meaning of life. And
Sure.
my meaning of life is we are meant to do transcendent things with the help of one another.
Mm.
And whether that's running really far, running really fast, building something, raising a child, we do these things together that alone we probably or may not be able to do.
Right.
And so, that's I think anything that for me, my medium is running.
Yeah.
But if it's CrossFit or weightlifting or again, building some amazing structure, whatever you want it to be, if you can find that coming together and transcending either a barrier or some challenge, that's life, that's living.
Right.
And my profession has become the physical aspect of facilitating that.
Right.
So what makes your specific instantiation of physical therapy unique? We've talked a little bit before, and there are some things that, you've brought up and you have reasons for. You're a cash-only practice, or you don't take insurance. What's the story behind that, and the why behind that?
Well, let's back up a half step to, because you had talked about, just mentioning what physical therapy is, and there's a lot of physical therapy. Physical therapy is such this wide umbrella of what we can do. And it really began as this like hospital inpatient rehabilitative sense, and it's expanded to so many things. So under my licensure, I could be working in an inpatient setting, helping somebody walk, or working on like draining their edema in their leg because they had a blood clot or something. Or you can do sports medicine, or you can work on low back pain. And so there's all these different things. I'm not sure I knew about that when I got into it, but the sexy thing in physical therapy, if there is such a thing, is sports medicine, right? It's like, I want to work with the athlete.
Right.
And so that was my motivation coming into the profession, because I was working with athletes. I wanted to help them. And along the way, I kind of learned, okay, well, what's the best way to do that? Well, and the stereotype is, physical therapy, you go and they make you work really hard.
Right. Okay.
You have to do all your strengthening and your stretching, and then you get the list of all your homework. And so I think that was sort of implicit, and I was kind of okay with that because I was an athlete and a coach. Like, I like doing the work. I like prescribing the work. Cool.
Right.
Yeah.
The two
It makes
worlds.
sense. Yeah.
But as I got into it, especially as I graduated, got into my own clinical practice, I realized that, especially you talked about maladaptive.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
When I got into ultra running, I got to see what that did to bodies, what that repetitive stress, either of the 100-miler or training for the 100-miler, which can routinely be doing a bunch of 30-milers.
Mm-hmm.
What does that do to our body? And what I realized is that whether it is small doses repetitively or a big dose, trauma has a really unique effect on our body's tissues. So again, trauma could be getting hit by a car, could be a fall, or it could be running down the canyon, from town down to No Hands Bridge 10 times in a day, which people have been known to do.
Right.
That beats on our tissues.
Sure.
And what I've learned is that sort of stress, that sort of trauma, what it does to fascia, which is sort of the connective tissue that envelops all of our muscles and tendons and bones and connects everything, it gets really, really stiff and dry.
Mm-hmm.
Fascia should be mobile. It should be lubricated and hydrated.
Yeah.
But the combination of all that pounding and sort of like the post-inflammatory stickiness that can happen from that, it takes way more energy to like work that out.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned that early on in my ultra running career. I'm like, oh man, if I don't get a massage once a month, or my rule was anytime I ran like over 26 miles in a training session, I was getting a massage.
Mm.
And that would be like a couple times a month
Yeah.
at the height of my career. So how then that affected my career was I started doing more manual therapy. Manual therapy is me using my hands to impart a force on you.
Mm.
And so I say this almost every day, that the irony is I got into this profession as an athlete and as a coach, exercise based. And if you come to see me today, we're spending 50 out of 60 minutes with you on the table and me pushing and pulling and doing things.
Yes.
'Cause most people who do ultra running, for example, need that. Most people who are complicated, who come to see me because they're complicated, have a trauma history of this old ski fall, that old car accident, this bike accident 20 years ago. And these fascial tissue restrictions don't go away. And sometimes it needs 15 minutes of an elbow doing this.
On a routine basis.
Not necessarily routine,
Okay.
but it may need. It's like sometimes I think about if you have to spackle a drywall hole and you put all this extra on there, that's not going to go away unless you sand it off.
Right. Okay.
So you're left with this extra. It's healed, right? It's the hole is covered, but now it's got this big raised thing that if you don't sand that off, it'll last forever.
Got it.
But it won't necessarily come back if you sand it all the way down. And so that's what a manual physical therapist does, is they're imparting that force. And there's aspects of chiropractic that'll do this. There's aspects of skilled massage therapy that does this. This is all manual professions that can do that sort of force into the body.
Right.
What physical therapy, what manual physical therapy can do better than a chiropractor and better than a massage therapist is after we've done the manual therapy, then I can prescribe the exercise. What's the one or two things that you need to do to reinforce that movement? Or, your hip was so stiff, you don't know how to flex it anymore, so now we need to do hip flexion strengthening. So we kind of do that three-dimensional approach.
Right.
Or maybe you've gotten into a bad running habit, so we have to change your posture or how you move your body. So now we're putting that all together.
Yeah, especially if you're running as a hobby and you're doing it regularly. You got to coach you out of the bad habits, because you're either gonna reinforce something that will hurt you, or you're gonna reinforce something you're not gonna get hurt by.
Exactly. And then that brings that back to the maladaptive again. So maladaptation is just the body like figuring it out. And so if you've pounded down the canyon a few times, your body it'll heal, but it may heal in a stiffer way. So that's a maladaptation. Okay, well, I'm fine now, but now I don't have the same hip range of motion that I did a month ago.
Right.
It's interesting. It's just it's healing what got damaged, but not with the like conscious consideration of like the functionality that you want your body to have. It's just like, no, I healed the tissue. It's like the tissue's healed, but that doesn't mean
It's like if you had a broken hinge and you weld it.
I'm so glad you brought that.
It's like
I was
it's
looking
fixed.
at the door. So
it's fixed, but it doesn't do the thing anymore.
Wonderful, Charlie. It's so great, because I always have these like bizarre analogies that I tell my clients.
Yeah.
Let's talk about an injury process now. Like an injury process is an inflammatory process. So, and this is another topic entirely, the difference between a dysfunction and an injury. But an injury results in tissue damage, where if you're looking at it in a microscope, like this is what the fiber should look like, now it looks like that.
Right.
There's actually some fibers that are
tearing, yeah.
And so in the healing process, inflammatory chemicals come in and do their thing. And then healing happens from that, but what it tends to heal as is more like that. That's the scar tissue,
right?
Or the spackle drywall that's just a little lumpier. But the hinge analogy is wonderful because what I tell clients is imagine you go down to your basement and there's a foot of water in the basement and there's a pipe leaking up here. You're like, oh crap.
Yeah.
That's an active inflammatory situation, right? Water's coming down, water's everywhere. We got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
What I always say from a treatment approach is, okay, we have to like plug that leak first, then we'll mop it up. And that's make sure that we treat the cause and not just the effect. But then after that, so you dry it out, you pump that water out, you get the fans in there, you got a little bit of water damage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that the hinge idea is wonderful because it's like, what happens to that door frame?
Right.
So you see, you got the basement door, and it used to open really nice and smooth, and now you're like, it just doesn't close quite right, or you got to jiggle it or lift the door a certain way.
Yeah.
That's maladaptation.
Okay.
Like everything's dried out.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that door. It just doesn't quite move right anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the body does. The body doesn't care if we are perfect. It just wants us to survive.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's going to heal as quickly as possible. So it doesn't care if the fibers are like perfectly like this. It's like, get that healed. Okay, this is super strong. Who cares if you're stiffer than you used to be?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
This is going to ensure your survival.
Yeah.
Whereas if we waited till you were perfect, you'd be
Right.
You wouldn't be able to move.
You need the quick results. Yeah.
because the DNA that took a long time to heal didn't survive to get passed along to us.
Right. Right.
So yeah, maladaptation results in quick healing, but inefficiency.
Mm.
Yep.
And then inefficiency. So again, so many of my clients are, well, I'm having this quirky low back pain or stiff hip, but they don't always tie it together that they had this fall 2 years ago.
Okay.
That they were in a ton of pain, but
Yeah.
everything healed, and then 2 years later, this maybe low back pain or ankle pain or knee pain creeps
Yeah,
up.
and then it makes you look like a genius because you start probing them, asking them if in the past 5 years, even 10, whatever, have you had any accidents? And you're like, oh, well, actually, I got rear-ended, and then you're like, okay, and then that gives you some clues, and then it guides your analysis, and then you do your therapy, and they're like, this is working. You're a genius, and you're like, well, I know the science of this,
And it's taking that systems approach.
Yeah.
Mm.
And the systems approach requires kind of looking at all those moving parts.
Right.
And so that, circling back to your initial question, it's like, that's what I think manual physical therapy can do. And for me, I always tell my clients, like, I am easily bored and easily frustrated.
Mm.
And so if you're coming in and you're not really better, I'm not going to keep doing the same thing.
Right.
You're,
If your knee is sore and I wiggle on your knee and you come back and your knee is still sore, I'm not going to keep looking at your knee. I've got to look at your ankle and look at your hip.
Yeah.
And that's part of my boredom and frustration. If I'm not getting you better, we got to do something. We have to look elsewhere and look at the system.
Right.
Right.
And that's been a more successful treatment strategy than
Right.
I think a more conventional orthopedic approach this day. As a knee. Maybe it's a little bit of the hip, but they're not looking at the pelvis or the trunk or the foot and the ankle in the way that I think we should, because we're a mobile, active human.
Right. I mean, the
Or a system that the parts all work together.
right. And you hear of people who are like, they had their ankle worked on and their left ankle worked on, and then their right hip hurts because they had to favor it for 6 months. So it makes sense that if you're protecting something, you're putting more stress on something else.
And even if they didn't do that,
Right.
even if they didn't favor at all, if they didn't restore, or for whatever reason, maybe they had a nasty ankle injury and they had to fuse the ankle. So now the ankle doesn't move quite the same anymore. It changes that system.
Right.
Or if you just
Right.
can't push off quite as well, then the left hip isn't so good, then the right hip gets stressed. That's
Yep.
super common.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
And okay, so that's obviously fascinating. The mechanics of the body and how we can, use what we know to help people heal and to be in a proper shape, in proper working order. But then comes the problem of getting the people the help that they need, getting that help to the people that need the help, right? So what are the avenues that people have to get fixed, right? Is it go to the doctor, get a referral? Is it use my insurance? Is it find Joe? How do they know to find Joe? If they find, you know what I mean? So some of the like discovery process, I know right before we started recording, you know, we kind of talked about that we touched on that, right? Like how people can, where your practice plugs in and kind of how you would hope it might plug in. Is that a reasonable?
Let's combine that with Charlie's question about the cash practice, because I think that they kind of go together. And so Uhan Performance is direct pay. Doesn't mean you have to have $100 bills to come see me,
Right.
but meaning that I don't process insurance. My services are reimbursable for insurance, but I'm not in network. I'm an out-of-network provider. So you can take my receipt and submit that to a insurance company if they provide out-of-network services. And there's a couple of reasons I've done that, but I'd like to go back to the first time that I heard about that, and I was probably a year out of school at a manual therapy course in Southern California, taught by a few really talented people, and one of the instructors was a cash practitioner, and he's still one, and a friend of mine now in the Bay. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, people pay you cash? Like, whoa. I'm like, that immediately became a goal. I wanted to be so good that people would pay cash to see me in the same way that most people pay a massage therapist, you know, straight out of their pocket. And so I went about working to get that good. And again, I think the reason I've become a manual physical therapist is I've learned that exercise alone either isn't as fast or just isn't enough to get somebody better. So in those maladaptive cases, those complex cases, the trauma cases, you just can't. You need more. And so people don't get better unless you push on them, or people get way better way faster if you can do manual techniques. And so that's where my professional development went towards, because I would see increasingly complicated cases, or even I would have my own pain that I'm trying to work through. And it was manual techniques that got me better and got me better faster. And so, but that also then seemed to be the formula for these people that I knew that were able to do this cash pay. And so that's what I did. But then, you know, we fast forward the clock to 6-7 years later, you know, the dynamics of insurance started to change, where with the practice that I used to work in, you'd get a paper chart, and on the inside of the chart, it would say, you know, their name, their information, their insurance company, and then their deductible. And the deductible is how much you have to pay completely out of pocket before the insurance will pay anything. So it's just this flat, big lump sum or increasingly big sum. And then it's like, oh, after that, then we'll pay 80%, or then you have to pay $30, then we'll pay everything. And I started seeing these deductibles, $1,000, $2,000, $5,000.
Oh, these days they are crazy.
And that used to be a ton back then. Now it's kind of the norm. It's kind of like $2,000 or more. And so then I started to see what my clients were having to pay just completely out of pocket to see me. I'm like, you know, this isn't that great of a deal anymore. And between the vagaries of insurance, they would only let you treat so long, or maybe they won't let you to do this much manual therapy, or you have to do this, and if you do it with this sort of billing code.
Your whole practice as a therapist sounds like it got basically tainted by the risk mitigation lawyers that are like architecting the insurance plan. And you're like, wait a minute. Is this about care, or is this about something else?
And unfortunately, insurance companies, their job, their kind of purpose is to pay out as little as possible. And that's how they make money.
Right.
Yeah,
So
it's a business.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
came
it's
up with all
business.
these rules to say, no, you can't see them that often. You can't see them that long. You can't do those things. And those became, that plus the paperwork became increasingly prohibitive to the point where it's like, no, I could now do this longer the way that I want to do it and for cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I don't think I was at that amazing of a skill level yet, but like the economics met me halfway.
Right.
I got somewhat better, but the economics got so bad that
And
all of
then
a sudden
you had
all
a
I
viable option then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and so I just took I was going to my physical therapist and I saw what he was billing and what I had to pay. I'm like, okay, well, he was getting at that time $163.70 or something for 45 minutes. And that was the insurance in-network discounted rate. And I'm like, I'll do an hour for $160. And that's what I did.
Right.
And so in 2016, I went off on my own.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. And I'm like, you know what? I can do this faster. I can get better results in an hour. People aren't having to, at that time, even today, still most PT is like 30 to 40 minutes.
Mhm.
Right.
So imagine driving like 20 to 30 minutes to a PT session, and then they're like 7 minutes late, and they're doing paperwork. So then you got 20 minutes worth of stuff that you're getting done. Oh, you got to come back in 2 days.
Right.
And so it became sort of a liberating thing, not only for me as a PT to practice the way that I wanted to, but I think it was a net good for the client.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You come see me, you get just like a focused hour of treatment, and we get you better.
Yeah.
And so that's the essence of direct pay. And as far as how people seek medical care, it's a very cultural thing. So you'd asked about like, well, how do people like, okay, I have an injury. What do we do? It's different in every community.
Yeah.
And some communities are very hospital dominated or system based. And I
Yeah.
kind of feel that in Auburn and Placer County and Sacramento, there's certain systems. Oh, I'm in this system and I need to go see this doctor. And then it takes forever. And I think people have to reach a tipping point
Mm-hmm.
where they're like, nope, I don't want to deal with that anymore. And I've heard that a lot in my 5 months of being here.
Sure.
Like, nope, I don't want to go through that system. It's going to take too long. I know I need to pay you cash to do that, but I want to get better quicker.
Right.
And
Right.
so they do. And then they also then quickly find out that I can deliver better outcomes as well. And now all of a sudden, even if their insurance was like, would pay for it, there's a hidden cost to that delay, or there's a cost to, oh, you got to go to that clinic that's down the hill 20 miles.
Right.
And so it's a slow economic reality that can bring people to a cash practitioner.
Mm-hmm.
But once they do, and once I deliver value, like, oh no, it's worth it.
Yeah.
When you can provide really good value, and Joe's in downtown Auburn, and he's a 5-minute drive, and I get just a really good hour session, and he leaves me with tools, it's
Mhm.
totally worth it.
I would say it's interesting because personally, I never really, I guess when I thought of like, oh, if I would ever need, some sort of physical therapy to get me straightened out and kind of back on track, the last thing I would think about is like going through the medical system to find that, like that. Maybe it's because I've been here my whole life, and I know that it seems like maybe not physical therapists, but people that can help you live in your body in various ways. There's lots of like private practitioners that you can go to that it's going to be like way better than dealing with the medical system. Personally, the way I view the medical system is like, that is my option for when it's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, stay away from that with a 10-foot pole. That's just me personally, and I've always been that way. But I cannot say that it wouldn't. I haven't thought about like the worries of like, okay, well, if I start going somewhere, like, do I have to like a private practitioner? Do I have to put up with their sales pitch because they're going to try to get me in more than necessary? Like, how do I establish trust with this private practitioner because now they're a business person? I'm still more likely to go down that path than go deal with the medical system. But at any rate, it's like we all know that like you're gonna pay good money for good results or good care, and it's kind of refreshing to even just to sit here and talk with you to remind me that maybe you'll get more results than you think out of a few sessions, and that there really doesn't necessarily need to be ongoing care for every issue, right? Yeah. Those are just my thoughts on that.
I think that's a good point about the business aspect, and yeah, you want value. You don't want to.
You just don't want to be used.
Yeah, you don't want to be cleaned out. I mean, nobody wants that from any business
Right.
owner, whether it's going to buy, car from the lot or a vacuum cleaner or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that we have to recognize that happens in it happens more in the hospital systems. And what the average patient doesn't realize is how tight the screws are turned on those practitioners, particularly PTs in a system, to get more units. And a unit is basically like, how many things do you do? Physical therapy is one of the last timed professions. Whereas like a surgeon, a family doctor, they get paid based on what they do with you.
Right.
And so they do, unfortunately, doctors get paid more if they do more diagnostic imaging.
Right.
Or they get paid more if they do more surgeries. PTs get paid to do more if they can sort of lump more different codes together. And in these hospital systems, they get the screws turned on them. Like, oh, you're not being productive enough. And so
you're like, I'm just caring for people. They're like,
right.
So it's pervasive in the system, and it's unfortunate that people don't realize that. But what I want to speak to that is this idea of skin in the game. And skin in the game, I think, is going to save our medical system. My cash practice, and I think a health savings account system is going to save our medical system because it brings skin in the game. And skin in the game is you stand to lose something, both parties.
Yes.
So when somebody comes to, let's back this up and talk about a conventional system.
Sure.
You have insurance. Let's say your insurance is really good.
Okay.
You either pay nothing or $10.
Right, to receive general care.
You come to physical therapy because you have back pain and you get a prescription and it says, all you care to come see Joe.
Yeah.
And this is what happened, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And you have wonderful insurance, $10, $5 a visit. Now, and I'm Joe, I'm the PT, the staff PT, and I'm just super busy. And so it doesn't matter to me if you get better or not.
Right, because you have 50 people paying.
Oh, my wait list is huge, so I can just talk about your day and, you stand over here and I'll stand here and you do your leg extensions or your arm curls and we talk about the weather.
Yeah.
There's no pressure, there's no incentive for me to get you better because I already have this stream of referrals.
Yep.
You don't care about getting better. Well, maybe you care a little bit. But the $5 a visit, you like hanging out with me. You like getting a workout in. Cool. Joe's going to
Nothing's at risk other than the thing that you're already putting up with, which is your ailment. But you're not also risking your wallet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we saw this in the system, right, where, or you'll cancel on me at the last minute because there's no skin off your back.
Yeah, Joe'll be happy for the break.
Exactly. And so that's sort of the state of affairs in our medical system right now. And it's pervasive everywhere because when you have a third party paying for everything, you don't know what things cost. I don't really know what things cost. I just get paid and you show up and you show your
I know what my premium costs. Yeah.
And that's the problem is that cost is getting
a disconnect there.
It's getting passed off to the employer. Who now can't hire as many employees or grow his business because he has this massive insurance plan that he has to pay for his employees.
Right.
So that's our current system. But now let's talk about what happens if we're in an HSA or health savings account system. So you got you got your money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the practitioner. There's enormous skin in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Where when you show up, and this literally happens every single day for me,
Mm-hmm.
when I show up, I have to show up and really give my best possible work. I have to provide the value. I have to get you better. If I don't get you better, you're not coming back.
Right.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, you're swiping that card, and that card or that cash or that check is immediately going to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I either do a good job or you stop coming.
Yeah.
Right.
And so if I don't do a good job, I'm not busy anymore. I know for a fact I'm not doing a good job. I either need to swim or sink.
Right.
I need to figure that out. On your end, it's way better for me because when you come in and you're swiping your card for $180,
Mm-hmm.
you are invested.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Like you're not gonna like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like I'm just gonna do
The more
my
I
thing.
the more I don't do my homework, the more times I have to give you $180.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you're, if you're not running the way, the new and improved way that I showed you, or
Right.
had good posture, or
Yeah, new and improved. Yeah.
or if you're lifting too much weight right now than you're supposed to in our recovery plan, then you're going to undo that healing.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like walking on that concrete that's not set yet. Okay, well, we now got to redo it.
Right.
But the difference is now you're paying for it.
Right.
And so that's double skin in the game, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it brings consumerism back to healthcare,
Yeah.
because now you care. Because maybe there's somebody that's like almost as good as Joe, but he's only 130.
Right.
Mhm.
And so I'll go see him. And it's the same thing. It's like you're not going to go to the dealer to get your oil changed. I mean, most people shouldn't be doing that
Right.
necessarily.
Right.
But if it's a complex thing involving the warranty with a brand new car and it's like your favorite thing in the world, heck yeah, you're going to go there. You're not going to just go to the cheap place.
Mm-hmm.
So I think bringing consumerism back to healthcare is going to be a wonderful thing. And I welcome competition because I have to get better.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, we're in the same. We're business owners. That resonates so much. It's like you sign up with me for a specific service to get more customers. I better be getting you more customers. Otherwise, you're not hiring me next month. It's like that.
And you're not referring people.
Then
to
you're
us.
not. It's
Exactly.
like I can't.
Yeah.
I have to perform. And you're also, same thing. That business is spending money. They're going to get the assets to me that I need in order to do my job, because hey, I just sent a chunk of change over to this business and they're asking for a picture. Otherwise they're not able to do the job that I'm paying them to do. I better get that picture because they're not going to refund my money if it's my fault. It's like it's all
Yeah.
that makes so much sense.
And it's just the beauty of like,
It's actually a good sales pitch too,
Mhm.
in my opinion.
how so?
Well, it's honest, for one. It's an honest assessment of the realities of the situations at hand, right? Hey, look, there's the way this system works and this system works, and this is how the skin in the game works. And if they don't like that, I just think they don't want to face reality, which is they'd be a tough client anyway.
And I think that it does. That is another cultural thing where I think some individuals have to hit rock bottom of frustration.
Yeah.
But some people want to have it both ways. They want to have quality care that's system provided and insurance
Mm-hmm.
paid for. And again, that's the quick lube oil change.
Mhm.
If you have a very simple thing, don't come and see me.
Right.
That's fine. I mean, but if you
Or
like
do
me,
just
yeah,
or
exactly.
do, but
And so
yeah.
it's like fast food versus super nice restaurant.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a time for either one, but
I'm gonna call this boutique care.
and
It's like
yeah, there's people that call it that, but at the same time, it's like it's the highest quality that I can provide, and
Okay.
most people, everyone will value from that.
Yeah.
Most people need it.
Yep.
Some people don't. And so it is a value judgment. And I would rather not have to have that dichotomy.
mm-hmm.
I just would love to have a system where every person gets like a substantial pot of money at the beginning of the year and say, this is your health spending.
Right. spend it wisely.
And you get to, you can save it and defer it and get interest on it.
Mm-hmm.
But when something does happen, you get to pick, do I want to go to massage? Do I want to go to acupuncture? Do I want to go see Uhan Performance for physical therapy? Or do I need to go see an orthopedist and get an MRI because I think it's either more acute or more stubborn or more severe?
Mm-hmm.
But right now we're funneling everyone into the standard system to either family docs or orthopedists that may know chronic orthopedic well, but they may not be the best person. And that's who I aim to be. I aim to be the family practice orthopedist.
Got it.
Yeah.
Where someone comes to see me long enough, I know their body.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm like, oh, okay, we treated this, or this totally is totally out of the ordinary. I think you should see your doctor because this is presenting totally different than what your body's ever done.
Right.
And I think that there's a room for more seats at the table of that sort of primary care model. And if you had a pot of money where you got to decide, I think that'd be a more efficient way.
I agree 100%. Just coming from a totally different perspective, I was homeschooled and through a charter system, and that's how it worked. Is mom and dad got a chunk of change, and there were goals, and that chunk of change, they had to figure out how to spend that money in order to get those goals met in our education. And it let us do, they bought all this, the necessary things, but then there was always like oh, you know what? This is a really cool robotics kit, and I think this is really going to benefit. And I have the freedom to invest in that and maybe get a used book for this, and it makes everything a little bit more tailored to the individual, because you're taking the decision-making process from a centralized, detached authority that's trying to figure out billing codes to the doctor or the local practitioner who actually knows, oh yeah, Jimmy really likes robots and mechanical stuff, and Chrissy really likes, art, and we can kind of funnel them in these different areas. And the HSA plan would do the same thing for people's health. It's like, okay, Joey he's really into running, and he kind of needs this kind of thing. And Cody needs, Cody's really into powerlifting, and he's going to allocate his health fund to kind of tailor to that.
You made him get jacked.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's it's fascinating that I can see how we are where we're at, and I wonder how we can get to there. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's tough. I mean, I think my only role in that is to be the best, highest quality practitioner I can be.
Yeah.
Right.
Deliver the best possible value, contribute to this community in the best possible way, and to elevate myself. And through that, I think it's going to pressure other systems to sink or swim themselves.
Yeah.
Because if we start to get a medical culture in different communities, including in Auburn, that is like, no, I don't want to go to you anymore. I don't want to go to the big place that makes me wait and is inefficient and doesn't give me quality care. Then they're going to be pressured to change eventually.
Yeah.
And so I'm just deciding to play this different game, but I really believe in it.
I think it makes perfect sense, and from a results perspective, from your perspective, for the client's perspective, welcome to town.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was fun. Is there anything else that we should talk about? I feel like we kind of hit on a lot of stuff, didn't we? How you got started. We hit on your journey to be a PT, a little bit about running, and a little bit about the system.
Let's talk. I mentioned one thing that I'd love to hit on.
Yeah.
That gets to I talked about the concept of an injury versus a dysfunction. And this is so huge in orthopedics, because we tend to think in our kind of Western medical system that any pain is tissue damage.
Mm.
And it isn't, especially when it's sort of comes on gradually.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a big part of pain, whether it's orthopedics or spine or sports medicine. I do something, I have pain. Why? Is it because tissue is damaged, or is it because of a dysfunction?
Hmm.
And so, again,
I mean, are those the two main causes, generally speaking? Just a dysfunction or damage?
I think so. Let me play this out, and
Okay.
we'll see if it covers that.
Yeah.
So if we try to delineate the two, so we already talked about tissue damage. Tissue
Yeah.
damage is I in the microscope I have a muscles, a tendon, a bone, connective tissue that has this sort of shape. I overload it somehow, and it now does that.
Yeah, it's stressed to the point of damage.
Or we should say we do something, and then suddenly I hurt a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And maybe there was a cause. I fell, or I planted the wrong way, felt something, heard a pop, whatever. Now I go and I get my MRI, my image, and we see that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's tissue damage, right? And then we talked about how that healing process takes those fibers and does that. That is an acute pain model.
Mm-hmm.
In our system, we do so well with acute pain. I
Mhm.
don't think I'd want to be anywhere else in the world if I have an acute bad thing happen.
Right.
We are
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Like if I get hit by a car on my way to work after this interview, I don't want to be in like Central America necessarily, or
Yeah.
maybe even Europe necessarily compared to here. We have an amazing acute system because they can recognize, okay, we're going to give you this image. Okay, that's torn, or this is bleeding. We need to do this. That's wonderful until we get to chronic pain.
Right.
And chronic is anything that is longer than a few months. And that's where dysfunctions come in. And so dysfunction is any situation that creates pain or inefficiency or just some kind of maladaptive movement pattern that isn't the result necessarily of tissue damage.
Mm-hmm.
And so my analogy for that is, you guys parked outside?
Yeah.
So imagine as a fun prank on my way out of here, I let the air out of
Mm.
like all your guys' tires. Ooh, fun. Uh-huh. Is there anything wrong with your tire?
No.
Structurally, is anything wrong with your tire or
Not
your rim?
yet.
Not yet.
Right.
And so that's what happens with a dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
We have a situation where, okay, maybe these bones are supposed to be like aligned like this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for whatever reason, something has changed. Now it's here.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Now, it could have been, well, this was torn, or
Right.
it may just be off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can get malalignment of bony surfaces
Mhm.
without having something be torn. In the same way that like maybe a muscle is weak,
Mm-hmm.
my calf is a little bit weak, and now I don't push and land quite the same on that leg as I do the other. That's the underinflated tire.
Got it.
How long can you drive on that underinflated tire until it's damaged?
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be a long time, sometimes not very long at all.
Yeah.
But where dysfunctional pain tends to come from is maybe it's an underinflated tire, maybe it's like, I'm trying to think of here's the other thing. I used to have this old Toyota Celica. I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
The quirky thing that would happen is people would use the emergency brake and it would get stuck.
Mm.
And it was in some weird thing, like you'd put it down,
But it didn't.
but it wouldn't disengage from the wheel.
Yeah.
So I'm driving along. I'm like this, that feeling when you're driving in an engaged parking brake,
Yeah.
but it would never disengage. And then it would like wear out like this brake pad and then
Mhm.
I have to get a new one.
Right.
Like that's a dysfunction.
Yeah.
That it got stuck.
But yeah, it's like
I'm
the
driving
dysfunction.
and then it burned out.
The
Right.
dysfunction can cause the injury.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it can be back pain, it can be neck pain, it can be knee pain
Mm-hmm.
that results from something sticking, something not moving right.
Something maybe out of alignment.
And so-
not in the right place.
Let's say you're not as dumb as me to drive your car with that parking brake stuck, but you're backing out and you're driving, you're like, this is weird, it's just clunking along. Well, what do most people do? Oh, I'll just park it. Well, that's smart.
Right.
So that's it's like, oh, I have pain, I must be injured, I'm going to rest.
Mhm.
Right.
The reason that rest is seldom like the right or the only solution,
Because you didn't get the parking brake unstuck.
you didn't fix the dysfunction.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I have knee pain because my knee is supposed to be like that aligned, but now it's kind of over here, which is super common.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I don't run anymore, cool, like it doesn't hurt.
Right.
But something needs to change to get that
Mm-hmm.
bone stacked on top of that other bone.
Mm-hmm.
And the same analogy you could use for the vertebrae in your spine.
Yes.
It's very common to get just a little shear, but all of a sudden it doesn't feel so good to bend forward or bend back.
Right.
And so that's so common. And in our system, though, we don't think of that. And so the body workers tend to not be the first responders in our orthopedic system because people don't recognize. And I think people who have done a lot of chiropractic work recognize, oh, yeah, like my chiropractor said that joint was out. And really that usually tends to mean it's just not moving right or slightly malaligned.
Yeah.
And then they do a manipulative maneuver and they put it back.
Right.
Cool.
It reminds me of like calling a big tech company. I'll just throw AT&T under the bus. Why not? Or something, just like, oh, I need help with this device issue I'm having with my device. And it's like, how long does it take you to get to like the level 4 technician that's actually finally the one qualified to solve this issue? Because like the whole system, the whole troubleshooting customer tech support system is focused around, did you reset the phone? Like all the basic stuff, or just like overly focused on the surface level stuff when there really could be an underlying issue. Had the person initially looking at it to triage the situation could simply identify, you need to go, to the appropriate care provider for this situation. You know what I mean?
That's a good example of how we are much more proactive with our devices than we are with our bodies.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we'll put up with stuff with our bodies for months
That's hilarious.
or years. But oh my
Yeah.
gosh, if our car isn't working right, we are in like immediately.
Right.
And so in that case, that's very cute, right? Like if my phone doesn't work right away, I'm calling somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Usually if we have like knee pain, we're not like, I have some clients that do, and it's wonderful.
For sure.
Because they're so much easier to deal with. But, in those cases when it's acute, you're like, yeah, you should. Have you rested?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I rested. Have you iced it? Okay, yes. I mean, that's kind of what you're describing.
True.
And you
Right.
do have to go through some of those hoops. But the problem is when people have had this issue, imagine having that same phone issue for months.
Right.
And you keep being told, well, did you restart it? I'm like,
Right.
dude, I've restarted it like every day for
You eventually
like
just
a
get
year.
a new phone, but like that's
Exactly.
not it doesn't
can't do that with your
translate.
knee.
You
Yeah.
can't- or your body in general.
Yeah.
But we'll do that with our
There's your
gotcha.
time. Yeah.
We'll do that with our devices and not our bodies.
Right.
Like we won't put up with things with our devices, but we will with our body.
Yeah.
And so I always encourage, it's such a big educational piece for my clients to realize that dysfunctions are far more common.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's maladaptation again, right?
Yep.
Got
It's
it.
like, oh, if I sit in a certain way and now I'm like, okay, that some either vertebrae in my spine might get kind of stiff or my hips get stiff. Now they just don't, that hip doesn't spin quite as efficiently in the socket. Now when it's time to run, I feel something weird. I feel a catching. I feel a pinch. That doesn't mean I've injured anything yet.
Right.
If you ignore it for months and months and months and you try to run 10 miles a day, then yes, that dysfunction, that's the half inflated tire that you've now blown out
Right.
because you've ignored that inefficient
Yeah.
system. And so that's a huge part of my job. My job is to find dysfunctions and to restore them to efficiency, and again throughout the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
Because so little of my day-to-day work is acute pain.
Got it.
I so rarely deal with acute tissue healing
Mm-hmm.
because that's the body heals that,
Right.
but it tends to heal it again somewhat maladaptively.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Right.
then it's the subacute to chronic that's where I'm useful.
So if your joints or any other mechanical aspects of your body have been aching and hurting, go see Joe. He's right here in town. Where is your office, by the way? It's right over here, right?
659 Lincoln Way,
There you go.
right across from the post office.
And is it uhanperformance.com?
That's right.
There you go. Joe Uhan, everybody. Thank you for coming on our show.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a pleasure.
It's really actually engaging and interesting.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks. I really
Good.
appreciate it.
Learned a
Cool.
lot of stuff. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Have a good day.